God. Hello, everybody. I see my head's a little cut off. I'll make a small adjustment. Hi, Dolores. Hi, Dale. And Carmen, how are you? Well, 9 o'clock snuck on me like a honey badger on a cobra. How's everyone doing tonight? That's a nice simile. Dale says, hey, Avril, good to see you. Avril says, hi, Dale, thank you. And likewise, it's a long time since our Bernie days. Dale says, yep, it seems like forever ago. No, Bernie days go on forever. They just take different form. Deborah says, this notification didn't come to me. I had to go to your page. This is strange because I sent you a private invitation, Deborah. Let me see. I'm pretty sure I did. Let me see. Maybe I made a mistake and didn't click the thing. Nope. According to this, I sent it to you at 8:48 p.m. So I don't know what's going on with Facebook. I can't explain what's going on with Facebook. Maybe another time we'll be able to figure it out. Yeah, I sent it to Messenger. That's right. Didn't come to me as a notification. Didn't come to you as a notification. I sent it to Messenger. It was a private invitation. I've got you on my list now, so I always send you notifications. Okay, there's a lot to cover tonight. Lots of debate, reactions in the form, of articles. And, there's Bonnie. Hi, honey. And so I'm going to start to share those. And I'll be going through them real quickly tonight. I hope. Article in Common Dreams, quote, reveals just how out of touch this president is, unquote. Trump panned over blatant lie that he made insulin cheap, quote, like water. This was from Jake Johnson. And there's a picture of a lady saying, I haven't shared this with you yet. I said I would, and looks like I didn't successfully share it. So let me make sure that it is successfully shared. Where is it? There we go. Sorry. There, you should have it now. And it says, there's a coalition of the progressive advocacy groups fighting to lower drug prices in the U.S. took President Donald Trump to task on Wednesday for falsely claiming during the first 2020 general election debate that his administration made insulin, quote, cheap like water, an assertion belied by the large sums that Americans continue to pay for insulin. Well, of course, when we all heard that, we pretty well could guess that it was a lie, even if we're not taking insulin, even if we do not know it for a fact. Trump just claimed that insulin is cheap as water. I don't know what kind of water he's referring to. This list of insulin prices, so President Trump hasn't done jack about drug prices. He also didn't do his homework, evidently. He's claiming credit for something he's done nothing about, featuring good prescription fair price. Lantus charging $443, Humalog $231, Novolog $234, Humulin N $490, Basaglar $342. There's Levemir $481. Nobody wants to pay those prices. Stat reported this following the debate that Trump, contrary to Trump's claim, insulin still retails for roughly $300 a vial. Most patients with diabetes need 2 to 3 vials per month, and some can require much more. Outraged by Trump's comments, several Twitter users posted pictures of receipts for their recent orders of insulin. There's a 10 milliliter vial. Plan pays $2,100, $79.22. You pay $50. My pharmacy prescription details, say from Rite Aid. Price without insurance, $1389.92. Prescription price with insurance, $453.65, right? And Trump signed a series of executive orders. Of course, the executive orders did not work. They were not expected to work at the time, except in Trump's fevered imagination. And so basically that's what happened. People were victims of his fevered imagination, right? Undoubtedly. And next, so there was the reaction to the insulin lie. And next, let me share that. Headline, this is from Julia Conley, Common Dreams. Biden plan triumphs over Trump's climate lies in debate, but green groups demand greater urgency to fight global emergency. You should be seeing this also. Let me double check. Yes, you are. There's Trump and there's Biden. There's people watching at a bar, it looks like, comfortable drinking stuff. People watched the first presidential debate. Climate action groups on Tuesday night said the inclusion of questions related to the planetary emergency in the first presidential debate was, quote, testament to the pressure of our movement, unquote, while urging a far greater focus on the climate in upcoming debates. The Commission on Presidential Debates sparked outrage and disbelief earlier this month when it released a list of planned topics that didn't include climate, even as the deadly effects of the man-made crisis were evident on the West Coast. People are asleep at the wheel, aren't they? I mean, the people who run our institutions, they're asleep at the wheel. They don't watch the news every day. The wildfires in recent weeks have torn through millions of acres and have killed dozens of people, right? After more than 100 lawmakers, 45 climate advocacy organizations, and about 200,000 people across the country demanded that moderator Chris Wallace include a discussion of the climate crisis, he did include at least a question. Biden and Trump spent about 10 minutes, 30 seconds on the climate crisis. Of course, this failed to satisfy the movement, and they want a lot more. But, quote, because of activism and pressure from everyday Americans, elected leaders and advocates, Chris Wallace couldn't ignore the climate emergency facing our country, said Lori Lodes, Executive Director of Advocacy Group Climate Power 2020. Quote, What these 11 minutes showed is that Trump is continuing to deny science, ignored experts, and putting the country at risk due to his inaction and corruption, unquote. Though Biden has come under fire for insisting that he would not ban fracking if elected president, the former vice president won praise for clearly connecting economic security for working people with climate action. Stated his intention to make sure no new coal and oil-fired power plants are built in the U.S., refurbish infrastructure across the country to ensure millions of buildings emit significantly less gas and oil, unquote, and create, quote, thousands and thousands of jobs, unquote, while reaching net zero in terms of energy production by 2035. Obviously, Biden is a piker. Millions and millions of jobs are needed for this. The Democratic candidate also pivoted to the climate crisis in Trump's failure to confront it earlier in the evening, rejecting the president's narrative about the danger posed to American suburbs by a breakdown in law and order, quote unquote, by saying the planetary emergency poses a much greater threat to working families than violent crime. There's Trump running with a playbook of the 1960s, a law and order playbook of the 1960s, the law and order playbook of the 1990s, hasn't recognized that climate has passed law and order as a concern of regular people. Quote, his failure to deal with the environment, they're being flooded, they're being burned out because of his refusal to do anything, unquote, Biden said, quote, that's why the suburbs are in trouble, unquote. Biden was right about that. The subject of the wildfires on the West Coast, the president repeated his claim that poor, quote, forest management, unquote. Trump is the expert on forest management, having never managed a forest in his life, having never worked on the land in his life, having never been a forest ranger in his life. He's sure forest management is to blame for the loss of millions of acres of land and not climate change. Some of the poorest air quality in the world in recent weeks has come to California. California's lost millions of acres of land and the burning of almost an entire town in eastern Washington. Trump also baselessly claimed the Green New Deal legislative framework supported by a majority of Democratic voters, but not by Biden, which would create millions of jobs. Well, there you are, millions of jobs, millions and billions, while transitioning toward a renewable energy economy in the coming decade would take out the cows, quote, take out the cows, referring to plans to reduce the methane emissions and curtail factory farming. How do the methane emissions come? Well, you know, the cows fart. Quote, instead of offering a single plan to combat the climate crisis, Trump proved Trump won't be able to get his hamburgers from McDonald's if we get rid of the cows. Trump proved he's unable or unwilling to comprehend the magnitude of the climate crisis, unquote, said Climate Power 2020, praising Biden for offering a, quote, a stark contrast to the president's climate denial. The Sunrise Movement, which endorsed the Green New Deal, advocate Bernie Sanders, independent of Vermont in the Democratic primary, but has worked with the Biden campaign to develop a far-reaching climate action plan, contrasted the two candidates' performances on social media. In the Sunrise Movement tweet, Biden's climate plan will create millions of good jobs. Trump literally has no climate plan. Look at that emoji. Hashtag debates, hashtag Green New Deal. It was a smart move by the Biden campaign to highlight the connections between climate change, energy, and our economy, said John Noel, a campaigner with Greenpeace USA, which has given Biden and Trump a B+ and an F on their respective climate plans. Trump has failed again. Quote, this election comes down to a choice between a candidate who's tried to roll back more than 100 basic environmental and public health protections during his time in office, and one who wants to put millions of people back to work by investing in clean energy, unquote. Quote, on the other side of the stage tonight, Donald Trump looked every bit like a desperate crook who knows he's losing, unquote. And Noel then added, quote, whether it's gutting the EPA, weakening the Clean Water Act, or giving handouts to fossil fuel polluters, Trump's agenda has put corporate profit ahead of public health and environmental justice since day one, unquote. Advocacy group 350.org also applauded Biden for making clear that, quote, climate action will boost the economy and generate millions of new jobs, despite misinformed claims from his opponent, unquote. That's Trump, of course. But expressed hope that the former vice president will continue to work to match the sense of urgency felt by the American public, two-thirds of whom say they want the federal government to act more aggressively to combat the climate emergency, according to polling by Yale. And there are more quotes of this kind. The Sunrise Movement expressed hope that moderators of the upcoming presidential debates will double down on addressing the crisis. And Sunrise Movement in its tweet said of Trump, for much of that time, 10 minutes and 30 seconds they took, Trump danced around, never confirming if he believes in climate change. This is an existential threat we have 10 years to address. We need a hashtag climate debate. Okay, so that's that one. And the third one, let's share the third one. Which is, quote, would you shut up, man? Unquote. Disastrous, chaotic, nearly unwatchable presidential debate after first 20 minutes, which, by the way, was the reaction of many. As we said last night, it was a barroom brawl. It was a mud wrestling match. It was a dumpster fire. And Jake Tapper's combination of all those things, which we'll get to eventually. The first 20 minutes of Tuesday night's debate was denounced in real time as nearly unwatchable and tedious charade after Fox News moderator Chris Wallace proved incapable of refereeing exchanges between President Donald Trump and Democratic nominee Joe Biden. We did notice that last night, didn't we, folks? Quote, would you just shut up, man? Unquote, Biden declared towards the end of an initial round of questioning after Trump refused to stop interrupting him. Then Biden said, that was really a productive segment, wasn't it? Biden says sarcastically, keep yapping, man, unquote. And Crystal Ball tweeted, this is utterly unwatchable. And Ian Millhiser tweeted, so as far as I can tell, the rules of this debate are 1. Chris Wallace asks a question. 2. Biden gets 2 minutes to answer the question. 3. Trump gets 2 minutes to respond. 4. Trump gets an indeterminate amount of time to heckle Biden. And John Nichols of The Nation said, quote, this debate is chaotic and unfocused because Chris Wallace and his team didn't have the guts to control the mics. The interruptions don't add anything to the discourse. They disrupt it, unquote. For many progressive commentators, it was both a grotesque and depressing political and media display given the current realities in the world. I've nothing snarky to say, tweeted journalist and former Bernie Sanders campaign speechwriter David Sirota at 9:20. Quote, I have only this to say. As you know, David Sirota is one of my favorite commentators. Quote, I have only this to say. This is a sad state of affairs when thousands are dying from a pandemic, an economic crisis is destroying millions of lives, and climate change is burning down the ecosystem. Others, like Working Families Party National Director Maurice Mo Mitchell, called on viewers to recognize what Trump's performance is designed to achieve. This one was good. Look, everybody, this debate is as bad as you think. The president's performance is designed to promote cynicism and despair. Don't succumb to it. If you're watching, translate whatever emotion you're feeling to action and organize like your life depends on it, which, of course, everybody always adds to that expression, because it does. Quote, Wallace lost control immediately, unquote, lamented Zach Carter of the Huffington Post. Quote, there's nothing of substance to be gleaned from this fracas, and the president looks like a jerk, unquote. I beg to differ, Zach. What there is to glean from this is that the president's performance is designed to promote cynicism and despair. Don't succumb to it. If you're watching, translate whatever emotion you're feeling to action and organize like your life depends on it, which it does. That's what you glean from it. And Adam Green, co-founder of the Progressive Change Campaign Committee, that is the Warren Support Committee, in the wake of the debate said, quote, "Tonight, America saw a sad, unhinged, orange-in-the-face embarrassment of a president who showed no temperament to lead this country," unquote. The president said Green, and quote again, "would have done better to take Joe Biden's advice and shut up, man, rather than show his inadequacy in tackling the coronavirus and economic plight of millions of Americans. It was an embarrassment. Joe Biden made that clear by replacing Donald Trump, we can achieve competence in the White House and address key progressive goals from health care to corporate accountability to tackling systemic racism," unquote. I think what Joe Biden made clear is that it's his opinion that by replacing Donald Trump, we can achieve competence in the White House and address key progressive goals. That's what he tried to tell us. Let us hope that he is indeed correct, because I believe that Joe Biden probably is heading for the White House, because reactions to this debate show that Trump really got trumped on. There was a CNN poll that showed something like 62 to 28 in favor of Joe Biden, something like that for this debate. It was ridiculous. It was ridiculous. So let's get on to the next one. I'm running through a lot of reactions in the form of articles. As you should know, unless you've just joined us, and if you did just join us, then that's who that message was aimed at you. Where is it? What happened to this? Where did it go? Here it is. Quote, "Fascism at our door," unquote. Guess whose expression that was? You'll find out in just a minute. Asked to condemn white supremacist groups, Trump tells them to, quote, "stand by," unquote, instead. And there's a picture of Donald. I wonder what that look's supposed to convey. President Donald Trump was asked point blank during Tuesday night's presidential debate with Democratic rival Joe Biden if he would denounce armed white supremacist groups like the Proud Boys and ask them to, quote, "stand down," unquote, in order to quell violent confrontations at racial justice rallies in U.S. cities. But instead of making a clear and straightforward condemnation, the president said such groups should, quote, "stand back and stand by," unquote, a clearly different signal. And then Aaron Rupert tweeted Trump's response to a question asking him to condemn white supremacist groups was to ask the Proud Boys to stand by. And he said specifically, "Holy shit, Trump refuses to condemn white supremacist groups. And not even hiding the racism," said Arabs for Bernie account on Twitter in response. And Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez put the exchange, including the ominous and revealing choice of words by the president, in stark terms. Donald Trump is a white supremacist. People have been warning about this for a long time. They were ridiculed, called hyperbolic and radical, not because they were wrong, but because others couldn't accept that our country elected a supremacist as president. This is fascism at our door, said AOC, who I think, as others have told me, is the real deal. And Axios quoted when it tweeted. Chris Wallace, quote, "Are you willing tonight to condemn white supremacists and militia groups and to say they need to stand down," unquote? Trump, quote, "Proud Boys, stand back and stand by. But I'll tell you what, somebody's got to do something about Antifa and the left," unquote. Deflect, distract. That's Trump. That's what he's about. Never admit error, deflect, and distract. Quote, "Trump fans, the flames of racism embraces white supremacy and employs state violence against Americans exercising their rights," said Senator Elizabeth Warren, Democrat, Massachusetts. Quote, "That's Donald Trump's America," unquote. That was a good comment by Senator Warren. So I will stop sharing that one and we'll move on to the next reaction. I've still got 4 more to go before we finish this particular sampling. So the next is the reaction of the Proud Boys themselves. We have to, wouldn't be complete without giving you their reaction. By Jake Johnson from Common Dreams. As Proud Boys celebrate Trump's shout-out, warnings grow that President, quote, "inciting violence," unquote, "to retain power," unquote. Members of the Proud Boys are rejoicing after Donald Trump gave the far-right organization a shout-out and marching orders during Tuesday night's nationally televised debate, heightening fears the president is deliberately rallying extremist groups and stirring up white supremacist violence as part of his frantic effort to remain in power. Daily Beast reported Wednesday morning that one Proud Boys leader readily interpreted Trump's comments as instructions to commit violence against the president's political opponents. Quote, "Trump basically said to go fuck them up," unquote, wrote Joey Biggs after the president told the Proud Boys, a group that openly embraces violence, to, quote, "stand back and stand by," unquote. Quote, "This makes me so happy," Biggs added, a celebratory reaction that was echoed by members of the extremist organization on the social media and messaging apps they commonly use, such as Telegram and Parler. I guess they pronounce it Parler. Frenchmen might actually say parlay, but there's no Z on the end. So, one Proud Boys member claimed Trump's comments prompted a surge in new recruits. Quote, "new recruits," unquote. Sorry about that. Refusing to condemn white supremacists when given an opportunity to do so by the moderator of the debate, Chris Wallace, the president said, quote, "I'll tell you what, somebody's got to do something about Antifa and the left," unquote. Shortly following Trump's comments, widely condemned by civil rights organizations, one of the Proud Boys social media accounts incorporated the president's words into a graphic with the far-right group's logo for Taylor Hatmaker, a Tay Hatmaker. The Proud Boys just made Trump's encouraging words for them uttered during a national televised debate into a graphic with their logo, Proud Boys, and there it is, "stand back," and then the laurel wreath, which went on the heads of the Roman emperors, you know, and inside it, PB, Proud Boys, and on the bottom, "stand by." The progressive advocacy group, Bend the Arc, Jewish Action, obviously a reference to Martin Luther King, Bend the Arc of Justice, or Bend the Arc of History towards Justice, Jewish Action said in a statement late Tuesday, Trump's remarks were, quote, "the words of a scared wannabe fascist, not a president, and Jewish Americans see right through him," unquote. Trump has repeatedly made it clear he considers violent white supremacists to be a valued part of his base, even after people are murdered, unquote, the group added. Quote, "He doesn't just enable white supremacy, it's his platform. Trump's open appeals to white supremacists and his dangerous rhetoric show this president will do or say anything in his increasingly desperate bid to hold on to power," unquote, pointing to another telling graphic that circulated among Proud Boys accounts on Twitter. Youth-led Jewish advocacy group, If Not Now, warned that, quote, "Trump is inciting violence from the debate stage," And they quoted Trump as inciting violence from the debate stage tonight. And Ben Lorber, in reply to himself, had tweeted, "They clearly and enthusiastically see this as a call for violence and mobilization." And Charlie Kirk's teeth grouper or groiper, I'm not sure what they pronounce it, they show that uh, brightest frog there. And the graphic says, "Stand back and stand by, Proud Boys." And there they are with an AR-15. Quote, "During a time when black people nationwide are exercising their rights to protest police violence and contending with rising levels of racial violence, President Trump used his debate platform to embolden white supremacists by refusing to disavow their activity and by issuing a directive to Proud Boys to, quote, stand by, unquote." Kristen Clark, president and executive director of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, said in a statement, "Even the FBI has identified white supremacy as one of the greatest domestic threats we face today," added Clark. Quote again, "The president's silence and acquiescence present a clear and present danger to black people who are most frequently targeted by incidents of hate." The term clear, and present danger, of course, is a legal term and refers to things like shouting fire in a crowded theater. It used to be a test that was used by the Supreme Court, the clear and present danger test. They still use it. It was a test propounded by Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes way back when. Most frequently targeted by incidents of hate. As Ali Breland of Mother Jones wrote late Tuesday, quote, "Trump's decision to not clearly condemn white supremacy and the Proud Boys in particular could have dangerous consequences." But Breland continued, "Proud Boys have already exhibited a pattern of violence by routinely assaulting protesters they see as not on their side, often without any physical provocation." They do that to journalists too, by the way, constantly. Adjacent extremist groups could also take Trump's refusal to disavow white supremacists as a tacit endorsement. The investigative news site Bellingcat recently reported on a trove of chat messages shared by right-wing activists in Oregon. It includes a message from a user named Paige discussing when would be an appropriate time to use violence. Quote, "I'm waiting for the presidential go to start open firing," unquote. Amazing, right? Democratic lawmakers joined civil rights groups in condemning Trump's remarks and warning they could spark a wave of racist violence ahead of the November election. Quote, "Donald Trump fans the flames of racism, embraces white supremacy, and employs state violence against Americans exercising their rights." There's that quote. Senator Warren again. And Representative Rashida Tlaib said, the Democrat of Michigan said, "The president's nod to the Proud Boys, that quote, again shows he is dangerous," unquote. This article was updated with comment from the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. So that's another one down. Next one is, I'll share that. More reactions. After, quote, "hot mess inside a dumpster fire inside a train wreck," unquote, stirred by Trump, the debate commission says reforms are coming. They're closing the barn door after the cow left. Following Tuesday night's, quote, "disastrous, chaotic, and nearly unwatchable," unquote, debate between President Donald Trump and Democratic nominee Joe Biden, The Commission on Presidential Debate said on Wednesday that it will make yet to be announced format changes for the two remaining debates in an effort to curb crosstalk and foster a more substantive discussion of policies, NBC News reported. Folks, was it really so hard to predict that the presidential debate was going to work out in this way, that Trump was going to engage in constant interruptions of Biden? Didn't anybody predict that? I mean, how asleep at the wheel were these people? One day after Trump repeatedly violated the rules by frequently interrupting Biden, the CPD said that, quote, last night's debate made clear that additional structure should be added to the format of the remaining debates to ensure a more orderly discussion of the issues, unquote. The CPD did not elaborate on any specific proposals, but said that it is considering multiple ideas and will announce detailed measures in the near future. NBC News noted that, quote, changing the structure of debates last minute is highly unusual and a testament to just how out of control Tuesday night's event was, unquote. Fox News host Chris Wallace was criticized for his inability to control, quote, to control the, quote, fracas, unquote, which some observers like John Nichols of The Nation attributed to the failure of Wallace and his team to, quote, control the mics, unquote. Quote, Wallace needed at the very least a mute button, wrote Washington Post columnist Margaret Sullivan. Quote, maybe something stronger, a penalty box, a stun gun, unquote. The CPD thanked Wallace for his efforts and expressed its intention to improve the capacity of future moderators to retain control. Yeah, improve their capacity. Maybe stiffen their spine a little with the proverbial, I won't say what. Quote, the commission is grateful to Chris Wallace for the professionalism and skill, but not to the courage. No, I just add that. Skill he brought to last night's debate and intends to ensure that additional tools to maintain order are in place for the remaining debates. Or, maybe electric shock for people who get out of order, right? Although it is unclear what changes the CPD will implement and whether both candidates will agree to the reforms. Biden told reporters on Wednesday during a campaign stop in Ohio that he intends to continue participating in the debates. He said, quote, I just hope there's a way the debate commission can control the ability of us to answer the question without interruption, unquote, the Democratic nominee said. The next debate, said to be hosted by C-SPAN anchor Steve Scully on October 15th, is currently organized as a town hall in which both candidates will answer questions posed by audience members. Now, how are they going to get the other guy who has not addressed the question by the audience to shut up if it's organized as a town hall? How is that going to happen? How can you control that? I mean, Trump is going to vomit all over the place. The only way you maybe can do that is to have a serial town hall with Biden on for a half hour answering questions, Trump on for a half hour answering questions, and then I don't know what, serial town halls. But if you're going to have them both there in the same place, they're going to be getting out of order. Trump will start it, and Biden will have to follow to defend himself. Whatever changes are in store, voters are hoping the new rules yield something better than what transpired on Wednesday night, which was described by CNN anchor Jake Tapper as, quote, a hot mess inside a dumpster fire inside a train wreck by CNN correspondent Dana Bash more succinctly as, quote, a shit show, unquote. heard that before, right? Why don't they do this? I have a suggestion for them. The way the UK is handling the Julian Assange trial is they put Julian Assange behind a partition, so that he's completely isolated from other people, like his attorneys and other people, who are attending the trial. He can't even consult with his attorneys. Why don't we put Donald Trump in a partition, completely isolated from everybody else? And then he won't be able to interrupt. He won't be able to interrupt. When we cut off his mic, we cut him off. He'd be like a caged animal. It would be perfect. While Tapper said that, quote, the American people lost, journalist David Sirota declared Wednesday in the Daily Poster that, quote, the people stealing everything won last night's debate, unquote. That was one of the best comments, if not the best comment, that I heard about in reaction to the event. Sirota argued that as long as debates mostly refuse to, quote, focus on the material well-being of millions of people, unquote, and, quote, debate analysis revolves around decorum, unquote, then the, quote, villains who are systematically bankrolling elections, buying Supreme Court seats, pillaging the country, and scorching the earth are getting off scot-free, unquote. That, I thought, was a brilliant reaction, a truly brilliant one. Now, here's one of my brilliant reactions, other than the one you heard of last night, and it was on Twitter. I will share it with you now. I will share it with you now if I can get to the share screen button. This one should be easier to. And this is a tweet from me, and I said, at Joe Biden, next time you get a shot at Lion Don, find a way to mention that his management of COVID-19 is 2,120 times worse than at Ing-wen, the president of Taiwan's, on the bottom line measure deaths per million. As of 9:30, that is today, 9:30, the U.S. equals 636 deaths per million. Taiwan, 0.3 deaths per million. Folks, divide 636 by 0.3, and what you get is 2,120. So, on this particular bottom line measure of success in coping with the COVID-19 crisis, Big Lion Don is 2,120 times worse than little bespectacled Ing-wen, the very gentle president of Taiwan. Something to think about, eh? Okay, that covers the segment of this dealing with the reactions. I'm sure you've seen a lot of other reactions. What I did want to say is that there were also some survey reactions. Evidently, Frank Lunt's focus group showed that people associated all kinds of favorable adjectives when they did some free association about Biden's performance in the debate, and when they did the same thing as to Trump's performance on the debate, all they got was very negative adjectives all the way down. And in the focus group, anyway, the heavy majority said that Biden won the debate. In a CNN survey that was taken, a poll thereafter, if I recall correctly, Biden won 62 to 28 or 60 to 28, something like that. And when people were asked whose plan was better for getting us out of the climate emergency, but people gave that to Biden by 63 to 30 or something like that. So Biden last night, according to those measures of public sentiment, that's what people thought. It's not that they thought Biden was so great or that he performed so well, but he performed sufficiently well so that he didn't get a bunch of boos, essentially, the equivalent of a bunch of boos. All Trump got was panned by almost everybody. By almost everybody. So that has to be noted, to be fair. Let me move on now. I am going to move on to Nancy Pelosi. And Nancy Pelosi's latest efforts to get something done, get some relief for people before everybody adjourns or before they recess to go campaign. Quote, ball is now in the court of Senate Republicans. GOP urged to immediately pass Democrats' $2.2 trillion COVID relief bill. This is Jake Johnson article from Common Dreams. And anyway, progressive advocacy groups and labor leaders are urging Senate Republicans and the Trump White House to stop stonewalling and immediately approve a COVID-19 relief package unveiled late Monday by House Democrats that would renew the expired $600 per week federal unemployment supplement, send another round of $1,200 stimulus checks to most Americans, and provide aid to faltering state and local governments so another 5.4 million people don't get unemployed. I thought I had to add that to the article. The $2.2 trillion legislation announced by Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Democrat, California, just weeks ahead of the November election represents a compromise version of the $3.4 trillion HEROES Act that the Democrat-controlled House approved more than 4 months ago. Well, that's nice, but tell me, why is Nancy Pelosi compromising against herself? In other words, I don't see an offer on the table from the president. I don't see an offer on the table from the Senate. So why is she compromising herself? That's what I'd like to know. Okay. I think she should have repassed the $3.4 trillion HEROES Act without the $500 billion she set aside for the lobbyists. And what she could have done with that $500 billion is spend some more of it on people. Spend some more of it on people. That would have been a wonderful idea. And then presented them with another $3.4 trillion HEROES Act that gave more money to the actual heroes. That would have been far better. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell dismissed the House-passed version as an unserious liberal wish list and has refused to allow a vote on the measure despite still deteriorating economic conditions and surging coronavirus cases nationwide. Well, why isn't that being trumpeted by all Democratic candidates all over the country in every election coming up, that the Republicans are stonewalling? That's why they don't have another round of stimulus checks. That's why they don't have unemployment insurance. That's why they don't have any basic income checks. That's why they don't have relief from the coronavirus economic impact. Why aren't they all running on that, like viciously blaming it on the Republicans that they're running against? What the hell is wrong with them? Lee Saunders, president of the 1.3 million member American Federation of State, campaign like you care, people. American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, AFSCME, said in a statement Monday evening that the latest iteration of the HEROES Act represents a good faith effort to renew constructive negotiations and finally deliver the relief that families and communities need. Bullshit, Lee. It's a cave. Quote, the ball is now in the court of Senate Republicans in the White House, as it has been for more than 4 months. So what's different? What's different? While the Senate has wasted no time trying to illegitimately jam through a Supreme Court nomination, they continue to turn their backs on the suffering and hardship of millions of people as the worst public health crisis in a century rages on. Speaker Pelosi's overture provides another opportunity to provide progress ahead of partisanship and get something done. So in other words, what you're telling me is that what the Senate preferred to do is to confirm the nomination of the Supreme Court of a refugee from the Handmaid's Tale instead of voting for relief for the American people. That's what they preferred to do. In addition to providing badly needed relief to tens of millions of jobless and hungry Americans, the revised HEROES Act also includes emergency funding for schools, for election assistance, the U.S. Postal Service, housing aid, and coronavirus testing and tracing. And Vanita Gupta, president and CEO of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, called on both the House and Senate to, quote, immediately pass the revised HEROES Act to provide aid to the most marginalized communities that have been devastated by the pandemic and economic recession, and to protect public health. And of course, we have to add at this point, there would be no need for this compromise and no need even for this HEROES Act if Pelosi would have done what she should have done back in March when they passed the CARES Act. She should have insisted then that all the relief for people be available for the duration of the crisis. She should have made it an open-ended funding bill to last as long as the crisis lasted, whether it was a year or 2 years or 6 months or however long. People are without support now because of her failure, because she didn't hold the Republicans up when they needed something, which was their money cannon for the big corporations. Quote, with the country soaring past 200,000 COVID-19 deaths, it is long past time for Congress to take action, said Gupta. We applaud the additional funding for elections and the extension of the census counting operations and reporting deadlines to ensure the most accurate census possible in the wake of the pandemic. Fair and free elections and an accurate census are cornerstones of our democracy. And by the way, an accurate census is mandated by the Constitution. This administration is trying to short-circuit the Constitution in yet another way. Wilbur Ross should be impeached, along with Barr, along with the president. And Vanita Gupta says, well, I already quoted what she said. She tweeted that. Anyway, the NEA, National Education Association, the largest labor union in the U.S., applauded House Democrats for putting forth, quote, a plan that prioritizes the nation's students, educators, school, and campuses in the continued fight against the COVID-19 pandemic, unquote. Quote, this is the second time House Democrats, led by Speaker Pelosi, have stepped up with a health and economic plan that meets the nation's needs and stands in stark contrast to the months of time wasted by Mitch McConnell, who hit the pause button while the pandemic continued to rage. And you should have added NEA President Becky Pringle and went home for vacation with all the Republicans for most of the summer. Quote, House Democrats have again stepped up. Will McConnell and the White House ever do the same? Unquote. Probably not. That's why they should all be immediately voted out in a month. But actually, not in a month, now, where you can do early voting. Do it now. Go do your early voting. Put them out. Put them out. Vote them out. Late Monday, Pelosi and Treasury Secretary Mnuchin resumed coronavirus relief negotiations that have been stalled for months due to the White House's refusal to approve a relief package larger than $1.5 trillion, a price tag Democratic congressional leaders have slammed as far too low to meet the needs of struggling Americans and cash-strapped state and local governments, which are already beginning to lay off teachers and other public sector employees. As the New York Times reported, quote, absent an agreement with the administration, the House could vote as early as this week to approve the legislation, responding to growing pressure for Congress to provide additional relief and calling the concerns of moderate lawmakers unwilling to leave Washington for a final stretch of campaigning without voting on another round of aid. Quote, but at roughly $1 trillion more than what Mr. Mnuchin has signaled the House is willing to consider, unquote, the Times noted that the package is likely just a starting point, all but guaranteed to be rejected by the Republican majority in the Senate should the House pass it in its current form, unquote. The Times pressuring the Democrats to cave some more. They didn't cave enough. Go back to the $3.4 trillion and tell them until you get a real offer from them, that's where it's staying. In a Dear Colleague letter late Monday, Pelosi, who's got to be the worst negotiator who was ever the Speaker of the House, presented the revised HEROES Act as House Democrats, quote, proffer to Republicans to come to negotiations to address the health and economic catastrophe in our country, unquote. A bullshit letter from Nancy, who says, quote, this $2.2 trillion HEROES Act provides the absolutely needed resources to protect lives, livelihoods, and the life of our democracy over the coming months, Nancy Pelosi wrote. And quote again, Democrats are making good on our promise to compromise with this updated bill. You didn't compromise. You didn't get a serious offer from them. On the table, public offer, which is necessary to address the immediate health and economic crisis facing American working families right now, unquote. So those are Nancy Pelosi's latest antics, latest useless antics. What kind of ball is she playing? She's trying to conciliate her problem-solving caucus so they don't get voted out, in the campaign. What she should have done is to change the HEROES Act to give more aid to their constituents. The Problem Solvers Caucus has constituents that need aid. Why didn't she put in a basic income for their constituents? They could campaign on that. The gutless wonders from the Problem Solving Caucus. They could campaign on that. Jeez. Next, we get to Julian. So, first, an older article and then a brand new one. I'll share the older article. Of course, the major outlets have been ignoring the Assange extradition hearing. I hope you've been watching Taylor Hudak every day. And she covers this, okay, for activism. She's been doing a terrific job of covering the Assange trial. As major outlets ignore Assange extradition hearing, AY demands freedom for WikiLeaks founder. And why does someone who's from China have to go and defend Julian Assange? Why isn't one of our politicians there defending free press in the United States? Why hasn't any of our people gone over there to testify for Julian Assange? I don't mean some of our Americans. Some of them are over there. But Daniel Ellsberg is certainly over there. There are others who are over there. But there are no Congress people who are over there, who are attending, who are speaking in favor of freedom of the press. There are no senators over there speaking in favor of freedom of the press. And there are no major American publishers over there speaking in favor of freedom of the press. Why not? Artist and Chinese dissident A.Y. Wei staged a silent protest Monday outside the Old Bailey Court in London as critics panned the media for largely ignoring the extradition hearing of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, whose trial enters its fourth week of witness testimony. For those of you who don't know, it's an extradition trial. It's about his extradition to the United States. Okay? The law in the UK says there can be no extraditions if the person involved is being extradited for political reasons, if the case is a political case. Quote from Wei Wai. He truly represents a core value of why we are free, because we have freedom of the press, unquote. Wei Wei, a longtime supporter of Assange, said outside the courtroom. Assange is prepared to fight, but this is not fair to him, he continued. Free him. Quote, free him. Let him be a free man. Unquote. And that comes from the Courage Foundation. It was tweeted from the Courage Foundation. See him alongside other artists and artworks inspired by Assange and WikiLeaks. Here. And there are pictures of the artists in support of Julian Assange, including people who are musicians and writers and journalists, okay, and painters. Okay, I don't know if there are any sculptors in there. And two guys who are giving people the middle finger. Wei Wei urged more civil action to bring attention to the trial, a call that came, as media watchdogs point out, an alarming lack of coverage of the hearing. I know, it's incredible. Quote, the next time you see a mainstream media talking head fawn over Bob Woodward, just remember that if they had any background, any moral core, they would be fawning over Julian Assange instead, unquote. said Lee Camp, a progressive but political critic, writing in Consortium News last week. And there's a link to the Consortium News article by Lee Camp. Camp pointed to the stark contrast in the deluge of mainstream media coverage of Bob Woodward's recent book and revelations about Donald Trump's lying to the American public about the severity of the impending COVID-19 pandemic last winter and the relative silence on Assange's trial. Video journalist and commentator Matt Orfalia this month also drew comparisons between Woodward and Assange's treatment by the U.S. government and global media. Bob Woodward has made his career publishing government secrets, Orfalia said in a video posted earlier this month. Quote, but today he could go to jail for publishing government secrets because the Trump administration has issued the first indictment in history charging a publisher for publishing government secrets, unquote. U.S. prosecutors have indicted the 49-year-old Assange on 17 espionage charges and one charge of computer misuse over WikiLeaks' publication of secret American military documents in 2010. The charges carry a maximum sentence of 175 years in prison. Journalists do not need to care about Assange or like him, quote unquote. Jonathan Cook, a UK-based reporter, wrote as the trial began in early September, quote, they have to speak out in protest because approval of his extradition will mark the official death of journalism. It will mean that any journalist in the world who unearths embarrassing truths about the U.S., who discovers its darkest secrets, will need to keep quiet or risk being jailed for the rest of their lives, unquote. That ought to terrify every journalist, quote unquote, Cook added. But, quote, it has had no such effect, unquote. And consider this. What happens if we're successful in getting Assange? And an American reporter comes out with a report of a scandal in a Latin American country that embarrasses the dictator in Colombia, let's say. And Colombia decides that it wants to extradite the American reporter who revealed the Colombian secrets. And the New York Times, the publisher of the New York Times, who published those secrets what is there to prevent them? And what excuse would the U.S. government use to not extradite the journalist to Colombia or the publisher to Colombia for prosecution? How will there be any protection if we succeed in extraditing Assange to face charges basically for publication? What will prevent our reporters from giving us stories about the misdeeds of foreign governments that the foreign governments want to keep secret? What of the American reporters who have published secrets about Saudi Arabian activities in Yemen? Are they going to be able to be extradited by the Saudis to get their hands cut off so they'll never be able to type anything again? What are we getting into here? What kind of stuff is this? I'll tell you what it is. It's the stuff of dictatorship. It's the stuff of fascism. That's what it is. Explaining the vested interests of corporate media in siding with Western governments on which they report, Cook continued, there were two goals the U.S. and UK set out to achieve through the visible persecution, confinement, and torture of Assange. First, he and WikiLeaks, the transparency organization he co-founded, needed to be disabled. Engaging with WikiLeaks had to be made too risky to contemplate for potential whistleblowers, including publishers. That is why Chelsea Manning, the U.S. soldier who passed on documents relating to U.S. war crimes in Iraq and Afghanistan, for which Assange now faces extradition, was similarly subjected to harsh imprisonment. She later faced punitive daily fines while in jail to pressure her into testifying against Assange, which, as far as the prosecution knew, to pressure her into lying about Assange, not testifying, not merely testifying under oath, but to get Chelsea Manning to testify under oath implicating Assange in espionage. That's what they were looking for. That's what they're levying punitive daily fines on Chelsea Manning for. Not to testify. Not just to testify. That's a euphemism. They wanted her to testify in a particular way. They weren't interested in the truth. They were not having her testify with a lie detector there to see whether she was telling the truth or not. If they had an open trial with a lie detector there to see whether she was telling the truth, she probably would have agreed to go testify. Because she said again and again that Assange had nothing to do with pressuring her but into espionage, that she did it herself, and that Assange was only the publisher. The aim has been to discredit WikiLeaks and similar organizations and stop them from publishing additional revelatory documents of the kind that show Western governments are not the, quote, good guys, unquote, managing world affairs for the benefit of mankind, but are in fact highly militarized global bullies advancing the same ruthless colonial policies of war, destruction, and pillage they always pursued. Second, Assange had to be made to suffer horribly and in public, to be made an example of, to deter other journalists from ever following in his footsteps. He is the modern equivalent of a severed head on a pike displayed at the city gates. He is the modern equivalent of someone crucified on a cross, people. He is a modern Jesus being crucified on a cross for the cause of freedom of the press. That is what is going on here. The very obvious fact, confirmed by the media coverage of his case, is that this strategy, advanced chiefly by the US and UK, with Sweden playing a lesser role, has been wildly successful. Most corporate media journalists are still enthusiastically colluding in the vilification of Assange, mainly at this stage by ignoring his awful plight. And the U.S. lawmakers have largely condemned Assange, despite what columnist Alan McLeod argued last week in a column for Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting FAIR is the, quote, incendiary precedent, unquote, Assange's case would set for the media in the U.S. in particular. Both President Donald Trump and Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden have condemned Assange. In 2010, Biden reportedly compared the WikiLeaks founder to, quote, a high-tech terrorist. Ignorant statement by Biden and a lie. I'm sure he knew perfectly well that he was not, in any sense, a high-tech terrorist. That's bullshit. Progressive journalists have noted the media's missing coverage. Katie Halper, Howe at K. Gastola, and a literal handful of other journalists and advocates are breaking the media the media blackout on Assange. Yeah, Kevin Gastola is one of the only American journalists over there right now. I believe Taylor Hudak is American too, because she doesn't seem to have any accent other than an American accent. It could be she's Australian. I don't know. I'm not sure. But she sounds like she's American. And Kevin Gastola, one of a literal handful of journalists. by Kevin Gustola of Shadowproof, formerly of Firedog Lake. Katie says, the other brave journalists include individuals including J.L. Passarelli, Kathy Vaughan of Consortium News, James Dolman, MEI Matzi, William R.T. at Tarek Madad, Charlie Jones of At Court News, by UK at Mary Kostakidis, at Rich I. Medhurst, at Craig Murray, or at Taylor Hudak. She mentions Taylor Hudak there. Kevin Gustola fact-checked this, and it only took a few minutes to confirm. Stephen Oldfield said, Kevin Gustola has reported more on the Julian Assange extradition trial than the New York Times, WAPO, BBC, ABC, CBS, NBC, Fox, CNN, and MSNBC have combined. Shadowproof is a very, very small outlet with extremely limited funding. But they managed to defend the freedom of the press, and an effort can't even be mustered by the New York Times and WAPO and BBC and ABC and NBC and Fox and CNN, okay, and MSNBC. I have a solution. Since they will not defend the freedom of the press, why don't we take away all the licenses they've gotten from the FCC and award those licenses to alternative media that are defending freedom of the press? How about that? How about that? And Lee Camp, a redacted, says, I absolutely mean this. If you view any so-called news source that is not talking about the Assange trial on a near daily basis, stop trusting, watching, reading that source forever. It quite simply means they are propaganda hacks for the corporate empire. Here's a list of the outlets actually covering the Assange trial truthfully. And there's a list from Shadowproof, from Kevin Gustola, who has been providing comprehensive coverage of the trial since the start, reported earlier this month. Daniel Ellsberg, the Pentagon Papers whistleblower, testified in Assange's defense and poked holes in the U.S. government's argument that in publishing secret documents on WikiLeaks, Julian Assange endangered lives. Gustola pointed out the WikiLeaks founder had asked the U.S. government for help redacting names prior to releasing the information on his website. He wrote, Ellsberg noted Assange withheld 15,000 files, but from the release of the Afghanistan war logs, he also requested assistance from the State Department and the Defense Department on redacting names, but they refused to help to redact a single document, even though it is a standard journalistic practice to consult officials to minimize harm. He said, quote, I have no doubt Julian would have removed those names, Ellsberg declared. Both the State and Defense Departments could have helped WikiLeaks remove the names of individuals who prosecutors insist were negatively impacted. Yet rather than take steps to protect individuals, Ellsberg suggested these government agencies chose to, quote, preserve the possibility of charging Mr. Assange with precisely the charges he faces now. There's a principle in the law which says that if you think someone is violating some sort of contract with you, okay, or some sort of law, okay, and they are offering to avoid any possible offense, that to hold yourself harmless, you have an obligation to work with them to heal any harm they might be causing in their exercise of their own rights. But no, instead, They didn't want to do that. They wanted to preserve the possibility of charging Mr. Assange with precisely the charges he faces now. That is a lack of good faith. That is a desire to intimidate the press and to withdraw freedom of the press. Not a single person, to go on with the quote, has been identified by the U.S. government when they talk about deaths, physical harm, or incarceration that were linked to the WikiLeaks publications. As Assange's trial continues, advocates fear corporate media is failing not only the public, but the future of press freedom. Cook noted that access journalism has weakened corporate media's willingness to challenge sources they rely on, such as the U.S. government, even if that means not quite holding power to account. He wrote, Assange did not just expose the political class. He exposed the media class too, for their feebleness, for their hypocrisy, for their dependence on the centers of power, for their inability to criticize a corporate system in which they were embedded. Few of them can forgive Assange for that crime, which is why they will be there cheering on his extradition, if only through their silence. A few liberal writers will wait till it is too late for Assange, till he has been packaged up for rendition, to voice half-hearted, mealy-mouthed, or agonized columns, arguing that, unpleasant as Assange supposedly is, he did not deserve the treatment the U.S. has in store for him. Would you like to bet that Chris Hayes is going to be one of the people who write a mealy-mouthed or agonized column? I'd take that bet, that he will do that. But that will be far too little, far too late. Assange needed solidarity from journalists and their media organizations long ago, as well as full-throated denunciations of his oppressors. He and WikiLeaks were on the front line of a war to remake journalism, to rebuild it as a true check on the runaway power of our governments. Journalists had a chance to join him in that struggle. Instead, they fled the battlefield, leaving him as a sacrificial offering to their corporate masters. On Monday, Rebecca Vincent, director of international campaigns for Reporters Without Borders, confirmed reporting from Gostola, tweeted news from the trial that medical experts are now concerned Assange could attempt to take his own life while in detention. Quote, even as their house is burning down, the media are insisting it is just the Northern Lights, unquote, wrote Mr. McLeod. I wonder whether he's Mr. McLeod of the Clan McLeod. I don't know. Sorry, a poor joke. And the very last one, we've now come to the last one. If you're still here, I hope you are. This is by Brett Wilkins, a staff writer at Common Dreams. Life in Supermax for the crime of, quote, merely doing journalism, unquote. UK court is told Assange likely to be sent to notorious U.S. prison. Where is this prison? There's a picture of people demonstrating in favor of Julian Assange. They're in the UK, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, saying don't extradite Assange. Yes, they're outside of London's Old Bailey on September 7th. I thought I recognized some of the faces. Julian Assange would likely be incarcerated in what is arguably America's most notorious super maximum security prison if he is extradited to the U.S. from the UK and convicted of charges resulting from his journalism, a British court heard on Tuesday. The Associated Press reports that Maureen Baird, a former federal prison warden in New York City, told London's Old Bailey that the WikiLeaks founder and war crimes whistleblower would likely be imprisoned in the ADX Florence prison in Colorado if he is convicted for violating the 1917 Espionage Act and the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act by publishing secret U.S. Documents a decade ago. Those documents, were military documents. So the Denver Post tweets that WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange could find himself held at the Supermax jail in Florence, Colorado, if he is convicted, of espionage. There's a picture of him, and I guess that's the Supermax prison in back of him. And WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange would have to be, quote, almost dying, unquote, to get out of arguably the most notorious prison in the United States if he is convicted. Then the article outlines that the massive trove of documents published by WikiLeaks included the Afghanistan and Iraq war logs, which revealed U.S. and Allied war crimes. Many of them were exposed by Army whistleblower Chelsea Manning. Most infamous of leaks is the collateral murder video that shows the U.S. Army attack helicopter crews laughing and joking while massacring a group of Iraqi civilians, including journalists, and shooting children and first responders. That video is a famous one. It's in the article if you want to go there and play it. I've linked to the article. None of the soldiers in the video or their commanders or anyone involved in numerous other war crimes that are revealed by WikiLeaks has ever faced serious punishment. Manning, on the other hand, was convicted and sentenced in 2013 to 35 years in prison, in part for leaking the video to WikiLeaks. The sentence was computed by President Obama in 2017 after she had served a total of 7 years behind bars. She was jailed again for 2 months in 2019 for refusing to cooperate with the grand jury. That's a euphemism. It was for refusing to testify against Assange, as I previously said. Assange faces up to 175 years behind bars if found guilty of all charges. Assange's defense team says his First Amendment rights are being violated, that he suffers from wide-ranging mental health issues, including suicidal tendencies resulting from his imprisonment in Britain's Belmarsh prison since 2019 for dodging a 2010 Swedish international arrest warrant for bail-related offenses. His attorney says he is at, quote, high risk of suicide if extradited to the U.S. By the way, those charges were extremely technical, and no one is punished for them in the way Julian Assange has been punished for them. He's been persecuted for the bail-related offense. What he did is, the arrest warrant, first of all, has long since been abandoned by the Swedes. It was an old arrest warrant from 2010. The charges against Assange were dropped for lack of evidence. In order to get away from the Swedish charges, because Assange was afraid he was going to be extradited to the United States, so in order to avoid that, he took refuge in the Ecuadorian embassy in London. They gave him sanctuary, and under a former president of Ecuador, he was granted citizenship to Ecuador. So he's currently a dual citizen of Ecuador and Australia. not an American citizen. Okay. Unfortunately, the old president, okay, of Ecuador ended his term and did not want, okay, to run again. Uh, the person who was his successor and had been his vice president for some time basically ran on a platform to continue the policies, okay, of Assange. As soon as he got into power, he changed over to right wing and he started collaborating with the U.S. To get Assange. So Assange was treated cruelly in the embassy from that point on and was isolated and basically kept in almost a solitary confinement state inside of the embassy from that point forward. And since he was an Ecuadorian citizen, the Ecuadorians had no right to let in a foreign government to grab him while he was resident in the embassy because he had the rights of an Ecuadorian citizen. And it's against the law in Ecuador to allow that. But nevertheless, the embassy allowed the UK to come in and to seize Assange on this old bail charge. Okay, they grabbed him for that, imprisoned him, okay, in Belmarsh, and collaborated with the U.S., who wanted them to do that so the U.S. could present them with extradition papers and charges against Assange. That's what has led to this. So since they broke in the late spring of 2019, was it in the spring of 2019? I forget now exactly what it is. It seems so long ago. Um, anyway, they broke into the embassy. They seized him. They put him into Belmarsh. And now for months and months, yeah, it was in 2019, he's been sitting in Belmarsh prison in solitary confinement up to 23 hours a day as if he was a dangerous criminal. And he's just a publisher. Okay, and a UN rapporteur has charged, okay, the UK with subjecting him to prolonged psychological torture. I mean, this is abuse, friends. If you don't know about it, it's terrible. It's a violation of the human rights of this publisher trying to exercise his right to freedom of the press, our right, okay, to freedom of the press, a right absolutely essential to democracy. Anyway, the rapporteur, Baird, is Baird the rapporteur, or who is Baird? Baird is mentioned earlier. Yes, Baird was the former federal prison warden in New York City. And she says, from my experience of close to 3 decades of working in federal prisons, I would agree that long-term isolation can have serious negative effects on an inmate's mental health, she said. Baird said inmates at ADX Florence spend almost all day, every day locked in their cells with no contact with other prisoners and almost no contact with the outside world. She said it is almost certain that Assange would be sent to the Colorado prison unless he was, quote, almost dying. And WikiLeaks then published some information about the Colorado prison. A short program giving details of the conditions that Assange could expect. Former ADX Florence warden Robert Hood has described the prison as, quote, not built for humanity, and said being imprisoned there was, quote, a fate worse than death, unquote. Baird said Assange would likely be held under the same special administrative measures SAMs apply to international terrorists, drug kingpins, and other prisoners jailed at ADX Florence. High-profile ADX Florence inmates include Oklahoma City terrorist Terry Nichols, the guy who blew up the building in Oklahoma City, Unabomber Ted Kaczynski, Olympic bomber Eric Rudolph, a Mexican drug kingpin, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, Boston Marathon bomber Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, and Al-Qaeda terrorists Ramzi Youssef, Abu Hamza, Richard Reed, and Zacarias Moussaoui. Critics expressed outrage that Assange, who has won numerous prestigious international journalism and whistleblower awards, and who has been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, could be imprisoned for the rest of his life for the, quote, crime, unquote, of journalism and exposing war crimes, government and corporate corruption, and other wrongdoing. And Gastola tweeted, the third week of Assange trial ended with significant testimony from a digital forensic expert with background in the U.S. military who used the U.S. military's own expert witness in Chelsea Manning's trial to discredit password cracking theory against Assange. And then there's a link to an article from Substack. It's Dissenter. I don't know whose that is. It may be Gastola's. Let me see. Yes, it's an article by Gastola, but it's not in Shadowproof. It's in his Substack. So, Kevin also says, recall first charge brought against Assange by prosecutors, computer crime, was intended to delude the world into believing U.S. government wasn't targeting Assange for journalism. But that was false. Always a smokescreen. And that smokescreen dissipated with Eller's testimony. Eller is the forensic expert with background, in the military, U.S. military. And Sarah Abdallah says Julian Assange is now literally fighting for his life as he tries to avoid extradition to the U.S., where he faces 175 years in jail for the crime of merely doing journalism and barely a peep from the Western media outlets and journalists posing as champions of the freedom of the press. Ron Paul tweeted in his support, saying the war on Assange is a war on truth. And that is published by the Ron Paul Institute. So why isn't Rand Paul over there supporting Assange? Why not? What's wrong with Rand Paul? Peter Hitchens says, where are the other British journalists in this? Can they not see that if Julian Assange can be kidnapped and then buried alive in some supermax by this one-sided extradition process, no journalist is safe? At Edward Lucas, ? How about you? And Assange Scotland tweeted, quote, I am wholly furiously against the attempt by the United States government to extradite Mr. Assange from this country, now underway at the Old Bailey. By Peter Hitchens, Clark Mika. On Wednesday, two former employees of the Spanish security firm UC Global testified anonymously in Old Bailey that they and U.S. intelligence discussed poisoning or kidnapping Assange while he was exiled for nearly 7 years in the Ecuadorian Assembly in London. They discussed poisoning the guy while he was in the embassy as a citizen of Ecuador. They discussed poisoning a citizen of Ecuador, kidnapping a citizen of Ecuador on Ecuadorian territory. I mean, this is incredible, people. One witness, an IT expert, said he refused to install microphones and streaming video recording devices because he, quote, did not want to collaborate in an illegal act of this magnitude, unquote. According to the witnesses, Assange's conversations were systematically bugged, even while he was using the toilet. Former Ecuadorian Consul General Fidel Narvaez said on Wednesday that he has seen enough evidence of the spying, quote unquote, including secret audio and video recordings allegedly made by UC Global for the U.S. government. And he tweeted that. Okay, the decision whether to extradite Assange to the U.S., an act formally requested by the Trump administration last year, will not be made until after the November American presidential election, according to presiding judge Vanessa Barraza. Why? Why are they waiting until after the election? Could it be that the British are ashamed of this and they really don't want to go through with it, and they're hoping against hope that Biden will be elected on November 3rd, and that then the Trump administration will cease pressuring the British government to extradite Assange to the U.S., and that they can find excuses for postponing the end of the trial until the new president and the new cabinet takes over in January? Could it be that Assange's fate now hangs on the likely result of the result of the presidential election in the United States? Could that be the case? Are we coming to that point now? In a way, I hope so. President Donald Trump and other leading Republicans have previously called for Assange's execution. Although this has no bearing on the UK's court decision. Why would it have no bearing on the UK court decision? Why? Doesn't the fact that Trump had previously called for Assange's execution make clear that this extradition is a political question, and that the extradition of Assange under British law is therefore illegal? That UK can't go through with the extradition because it violates their own extradition treaty with the United States, because it is a political question? Earlier this month, Common Dreams reported that Pentagon Papers whistleblower Daniel Ellsberg said the U.S. is seeking not only, quote, revenge, unquote, against Assange, but also to crush future whistleblowers by extraditing, prosecuting, and jailing him for the rest of his life. The important thing here is not just crushing future whistleblowers. They've always wanted to crush the whistleblowers, and we can worry about fighting that battle when this first battle is taken care of. But in Assange's case, they're not trying to crush a whistleblower. They're trying to crush a prosecutor. I'm sorry, a publisher. But that was a Freudian slip. They're trying to crush a publisher and jail the publisher for the rest of his life, so that no publishers will take anything from whistleblowers and publish it ever again. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to muzzle the press, take away freedom of the press, and crush future publishers by extraditing, prosecuting, and jailing Assange for the rest of his life. So that's what I wanted to say tonight, folks. Hope you liked it. I'm going to move to your comments. I see 9 of you are still here. That's hanging in there for you. Well, for me, thank you. Avril says, Proud Boys caught 9 felonies in Portland today. Agolf should be charged with inciting a riot. He should. After he gets out of the presidency, he should be charged with inciting a riot while he was president. Avril says, Chris Hedges. Well, Chris Hedges has defended Assange, I think, on numerous occasions. Evelina says, stand back, stand by, I believe he said, shake my head. Evelina says, can't hear. Avril says, we can. Can't hear you, Dr. Joe. Avril says, I like the samplings a whole lot. Kay says, Evelina, try leaving and coming back. Sometimes that works. Steve says, I can hear fine. Maybe go out and come back in. Avril says, thanks for responding. I'm sorry, Evelina. When I read these things, I can't see the comments because I'm basically going through the articles fast, so I can't see them both on the same screen. I really should have a split screen capability so I can see your comments that way, but I don't have that. So I apologize. I can see your comments now, but I couldn't see it then. Avril says, my pleasure. And Evelina says, Steve Wolfbrand, thank you, Steve. I'll try that. Avril says, Proud Boys look like rejected garden gnomes kicked out of the Garden Society for being fat, confused, and ugly. Well, I guess the ugliness they can't help. The rest of it, they probably can. And Avril says, one thing, Herr Fuhrer definitely exposed himself as the racist POS that he is on national TV. I think so. And Nikki King says, I hadn't noticed him trying to hide it. Nikki King says, the only good thing about Trump is the neo-libs fight back. Avril says, yeah, you have a point. Kay says, I could hardly sit through it, shake my head. Avril says, yeah, Wallace should have thrown his shoes at him. Yeah. Kay says, someone suggested a shock collar for a dump. Laugh out loud, love that idea. Steve says, I think the next debate, we should just give them gloves and a boxing ring. I'll tell you, I'd love to see that. I'd love to see that because Biden would really kick his ass. I mean, that fat slug, I'm sure he can't fight at all anymore. Though I understand he was a big bully in his youth. Avril says, he'll get electrocuted in a jiffy. I was thinking video games. How about golf? Kay says, I had friends suggest that I run for a local office when I lived in southeast of North Carolina. I knew I couldn't handle all the stress of the endless arguments in politics. Avril says, why don't we put DT in a rubber room with one of those snazzy jackets on that buckles in the back? And Nikki says, Joe, you look very 3D. I feel like I could reach out and touch you. Well, thank you, Nikki. I guess that's good, huh? I'm glad I don't look flat against the screen anymore. Kay says, we call that seclusion, quote unquote, on male crisis, Avril. Laugh out loud. Avril said, isn't it cool? Nikki King said, love it. And Avril says, yeah, let's seclude the fascist Trump society, please. Kay says, yes, Avril, yes, let's seclude the fascist away from society, please. Charles says, good evening, everyone. What a joy it is to hear Dr. Joe Firestone and see everyone tuning in. Hi, Charles. How are you? Steve says, good evening, Sarah. Kay says, hi, Charles. Avril says, I give up autocorrect. Keep saying secluded when I want to write seclude. Charles says, thank you, friend. And Nikki King says, good to see you here, Charles. Kay says, I figured it out, Avril. Laugh out loud. Avril says, thank you, Avril says, because Pelosi wants to attract the moderate Republicans. She never attracted a moderate Republican in her life. The moderate Republicans. She thinks she's going to get moderate Republicans? Come on. First of all, There are no moderate Republicans in the Senate. There are no moderate Republicans in the Senate. I mean, the most moderate ones are Susan and Lisa, right? I mean, that's it. Oh, then there's Mitt. He's a really moderate Republican, right? Really moderate. Okay, and then Grassley, another really moderate one, right? Are there any moderate Republicans left in the House at all? She doesn't need any House Republicans. Okay, says Pelosi needs to go ASAP. Alvaro says, oh, please, 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 I'm pleading like James Brown down on my knees. Nikki King says, I might have missed it, but I haven't seen a single one campaign on corona relief of any kind. No, I haven't seen them campaign on corona relief of any kind. I have seen challengers to incumbents campaign on that, but I haven't seen incumbents campaign on corona relief. The reason why is Senate incumbents probably have to get a buyer leave from Schumer first, and House incumbents probably have to get a buyer leave from Nancy unless they happen to be progressives. And of course, if they're people, okay, in AOC's district, they know that she's going to go for relief. She doesn't even have to campaign on that. And Rashida the same, and Ilhan the same. And Rashida has already put forward the Automatic Booster Communities Act, of course. And Pramila has put forward her own bill, so she's for relief too. She's probably campaigning on those. But Avril says, so many evictions, cholera is going to become a serious issue because people are pooping in the environment, which will leach into the groundwater. Good point. Kay says, looks like Shahed Buttar for Congress has been screwed. Sadly, he would be great. He would be. Hopefully, people in San Francisco will wake up and see what a POS Nancy Pelosi is. Avril says, hopefully there's some don't know, like folks finally waking up. Steve Wolfman, it's already happened on Skid Row here in L.A., says Steve. Thanks, Steve. That's because the billionaires pay her a lot of money to be ineffective. They do. And through her, they pay the whole Democratic Party in the House to be ineffective. And Kay says, I would hope, Avril. And Nikki says, I read about that. Steve says, well, it's not over yet, Kay. Avril says, cholera. I hadn't heard of it happening. I only read about it. Steve said, I think it was typhus, actually. Weird medieval shit. It even got into City Hall offices. Wonderful. It got into City Hall offices. Well, maybe that will teach him a thing or two about homelessness. Kay says, just what this country needs is a new pandemic of cholera. Shake my head. Steve Wolfbrand said, well, it wouldn't be a pandemic of cholera. It would just be an epidemic of cholera because it wouldn't spread internationally. Or maybe it would spread to Mexico. Steve Wolfbrand said, can you imagine people being asked to get cholera vaccinations when QAnon COVIDiots rail against corona vaccines? Nikki King says, yeah, I was just thinking about that too. Arvel says, oh yes, typhus, I forgot about that one. It's deadly too, if I recall right. But Dr. Joe, please become a consultant for the Democrats. They wouldn't want me. They wouldn't want me to be a consultant for them. They insist. No, they insist on just rigging the system so the incumbents can keep on winning. And as for the rest, they don't really care if they lose. Steve, you have no idea what life is like here. Our streets are full of zombies. Yesterday, I saw a guy washing his balls on a bus stop bench. It's insane. That is insane. My God. Kay says, our press is all bought and paid for. Nikki King says, that's why Joe Rogan moved to Texas. Oh, man, amazing. Deborah says, he thinks it's better in Texas? He thinks they're not going to wash their balls in Texas? Deborah Wilson says, that is so disappointing of Bernie for not championing Julian. Well, Bernie is trying to fry a lot of big fish. Okay. Julian is a very big fish to work on, but Bernie has so much else on his plate right now. Okay. But not every congressman has that particular burden, and not every senator. You would think somebody like Sheldon Whitehouse, who is supposed to care very much about civil liberties, would do something for Julian. I've heard him speak very passionately about civil liberties and the importance, of civil liberties. And he seemed very eloquent and very authentic, about that. He's not doing much else, certainly nothing else of use to the rest of us. Maybe he can go champion Julian. Kay says, the gray zone is the only one I know of that covers Assange. Well, now you know that Shadowproof also covers Assange continuously, almost every day, by Kevin Gustola. Steve Wolfbrand says, exactly, Nikki King. Alvaro says, I believe it. Here in Miami, a pregnant girl had on an oversized sweater, and she took a bath in it by soaping it up and was using a water hose to rinse it all off in the backyard of a church. Very sad, but at least she was washing off. Steve Wolfbrand said, the political vigilante with Graham Elwood covers Assange, but not directly, I don't think. I think much of his information comes from Taylor Hudak and maybe from some others. I haven't seen who else he's had on other than Taylor. Kay says, yes, he does, but I don't listen to him too much. And Alva says, Nikki King because of disease. Okay, Nikki says the homeless problem. Steve says, Joe Rogan left because of too many homeless. I'm fixing to do the same, but probably Mexico. Aren't there homeless people in Mexico, Steve? Alva says, a gray zone guy is testifying on Julian's behalf. I just remembered as you mentioned it. Who is it who's testifying? Okay, is it Aaron Mate? I think it might be Aaron Mate. He's great, by the way. And also Norton is great. And also Max Blumenthal is great. And also Anya Parampil, is wonderful. They are a wonderful bunch over at the Gray Zone. And Deborah Wilson says, wow, no condemnation, of Bernie's silence. As I said before, I think Bernie is already carrying a very, very heavy load. And that heavy load is on our behalf. And we've got a very immediate fascism problem at this point, to try to block. Bernie cannot do everything. He cannot be the champion of everything in the Senate. Kay says, about half of our population lives in third world conditions. Shake my head. Yes. Steve says, Assange isn't even an American. Shouldn't he be extradited to Australia? Well, that's what's another bewildering part. As he's a foreign publisher, he publishes over the internet. He's an Australian citizen. He was releasing the things he released from Europe. In other words, the publication connection through WikiLeaks was over in Europe. It wasn't in the United States. So, how can he be extradited to America? I guess they're extraditing him under the Espionage Act in some way. So they're saying, oh, this guy's a foreign spy, basically, okay, is what they're claiming. And they're saying, okay, in the UK, that this is not a political case. When the foreign spy released information about crimes committed by the U.S. government. How is that not a political case? How is it not political? I don't understand. It's steeped in international politics. It's a political case. I mean, not for a minute should it be decided as anything else. It's clear what the UK is doing is a railroad job. It's against their laws. I mean, they should be ashamed. The supposedly constitutional government of the UK, where, if anything, civil liberties are supposed to be more respected than here in the United States. I mean, what is going on? Avril says, oligarchs stick together, all else is theater, hence the international persecutions of whistleblowers and publishers. Carmen, that's right. Kay says he dared to report on U.S. corruption. And Steve says Susie Dawson, Julian's friend, is also in exile in Russia. I know. Avril says Bernie wants that committee appointment more than anything else. He wants to retain his budget committee appointment, but he doesn't want it for himself. You know that that's about Bernie continuing his work to put some legislation out of that committee as the committee chairman that is good for the rest of us. That's what that is about. No, Susie Dawson is not his girlfriend. I mean, she's his friend, and she's a female. And, I think she was one of those that he reported, his information to. She may even be a co-author of his on something. But she's not his fiance, who he may have married by now. Deborah Wilson says, you all are creeping me out. The Randy Credico stood up and challenged his fellow journalists at a White House Correspondents' Dinner to implore any of them to stand up with him for Julian Assange, and not one of them would. He was muscled out of the venue by security. Cowards. Yeah, they wouldn't do it because it's their jobs. It's their jobs. I mean, the free press is really dependent on small publishers who have integrity and will support the reporters. When the major outlets are taken over by multinational conglomerates, the free press is gone. They're gone. When you work for a multinational conglomerate, it's always about the money. It's always about the profit. It's always about the stock market. Structurally, we have to end this organization of the press. The organization of the press we have now is a threat to democracy. Kay says this country and the press is so corrupt. Steve Fulbrand said, no, not not a romantic connection. Julian is married, I believe. Susie is a New Zealand journalist who blew the whistle on the establishment as a personal friend of Julian. Yeah, that's the connection. I'm sorry. I confused her as being a friend of Ed Snowden's and was deeply involved in vigil for Julian Assange. She's in exile in Russia like Snowden. That's correct, Steve. Thank you for correcting me. Yeah, if the FCC weren't corrupt too, Alva says, oh, wow, thanks for the explanation. Steve said, I thought it was a different guy. I'm not able to remember the name, but yeah, I remember that happened. Steve Day says, Steve Wolfburn, he's my friend. I watched it on the Jimmy Dore show. Nikki King said, the video was frozen for me. Anyone else? Good here, Nikki. Alva says, no hood here might be your signal K. Evening says, not frozen, but volume is hardly audible for me. Okay, I could easily increase the volume. I did that. And Steve said, no, go all the way out and come back in. Okay, thanks. Steve Day says, good here, quickly go out and come back in. And Alva says, good connection, signal correction. Nikki says, I think that's better, thanks. Steve Wolfbrand said, we're the middle of the street. Laugh out loud. Didn't work for me, Steve. Thank you anyway. Alva said, prison is on Seattle, I think. The ADX, Florence prison is in Colorado. Florence, Colorado. Okay, and Nikki King said, I had to close the whole tab and start over. Alva says, in Colorado, I stand corrected. Alva says, shouldn't Australia be fighting for Julian? They should be, but Australia has a problem. Australia is a member of the Five Eyes. It's an organization that involves the collaboration of the intelligence agencies of the United States and the UK and Canada and Australia and I believe New Zealand. I believe they're the Fifth Eye, and they call themselves the Five Eyes. And the Five Eyes is like the deep state of Australia. They have a lot of influence in Australia, and they didn't want Australia to fight for Julian, and I don't think the socialists are strong enough in Australia to fight for him. I think there is a lot of internal resistance in Australia to what they're doing to him, but they haven't been successful politically. Steve said, so we can basically kidnap any journalists anywhere in the world, even if they're not Americans. That sucks. America sucks. I know. That's what we're trying to do something about. Alva says, America ain't the only ones that suck. But a lot of other countries suck because we suck. We started sucking first, and then we made a bunch of them suck. Of course, there were a lot of them that sucked to begin with also. There are a lot of nations in the world. There were always a lot of sucky nations. A lot of the sucky nations, we caught the sucky disease from a lot of the sucky nations. And when we started becoming a sucky nation, when we got to be too powerful, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Steve says, Australia is an American puppet. Right. Steve says, Ginger Liberty. Avril Mantle says, but who is going to hold the U.S. accountable for anything at all? That's the problem. It's going to have to be, I'm afraid, a coalition of nations, and we're going to have to be very, 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 very evil, and the nations that counter us are not necessarily going to be, nations we like or think highly of. Like, it might be a coalition of China and Russia and Pakistan and Venezuela and, and maybe eventually Brazil, if things turn around again, in Brazil. It might be a coalition that's just unprecedented all over the world, because only a very powerful coalition of a number of other nations will be able to stand up to the military and financial power of the United States. Don't underestimate the financial power. That's a lot of what the U.S. has going for it. Steve says, anyone else completely depressed yet? I'm not doing this to depress you guys. I'm doing this to get you guys to keep fighting. It's about fighting. It's not about getting depressed. Almost suicidal. Hope is fleeting everywhere. And Bernie was our anchor. This is not about Bernie. This is about us. Us has to be our anchor. Deborah Wilson says, Ron Paul just had a stroke on the air. Oh, no. Steve says, I guess I can always go out in the desert and take some mushrooms. Magic mushroom. Deborah Wilson said, but he wasn't lifting a finger before that anyway. At least he was publishing condemnations. Nava says, aren't those fatal to the kidneys and liver? I mean, I don't know what Ron Paul can do. He's an old man now. He's retired. He's not in the Congress anymore. He doesn't have any power, except his son has power as a senator, but I don't know what his influence with his son is at this point. Avro says, aren't those fatal to the kidneys and liver? Steve Wolfbrand says, no, Avro, not at all. And Deborah Wilson says, Biden doesn't care about Julian Assange. He might not care about Julian Assange, but he doesn't have to care about Julian Assange. He has to care about a free press. Does Biden care about a free press? I don't know. I really don't know. Nikki King says Biden will never do anything to save him. The Clinton Dems feel it's Julian Assange's fault that Hill's lost. Yeah, but if Biden wins the presidency, he's not going to be sorry that Hill's lost, will he? Because if Hill's won, he would never have been the president. So, Nikki says, well, of course, it's everyone's except her fault. Deborah says, Nikki King, he's part of her cabal, AK crime ring. Well, if he becomes the president of the United States, then she'll be part of his cabal, AK crime ring. Nikki King says, oh no. Kay says, we're already too evil, Joe. And Steve says, Aaron Mate is great and his father is wonderful as well on the subject of addiction. Yeah, his father's a psychiatrist. Alva says, because America's a prison nation. Graham Elwood visited Susie Dawson in Moscow. Yes, I remember that. He did. Laura says, yes, Aaron Mate. Steve Wolfman said, WikiLeaks exposed John Podesta's pedophilia. And Avril said, right, he exposed HRC and her asking the media to elevate DT because she thought that she could whip him easy. I remember that. Steve says, wow, new background, Doc. Yeah, new background. Evelina says, Pelosi said that the U.S. wouldn't go along with an illegal Brexit, though. What is your opinion on Pelosi's affirmation? I don't think Pelosi has anything to say about that. She doesn't have anything to say about that. I mean, there's no such thing, okay, as an illegal Brexit. It's just getting out of a treaty. You can get out of a treaty. I mean, the United States drops treaties all the time, except when it doesn't want to drop a treaty. Then it says we can't get out of it because we have a treaty. I mean, how did Trump get out of the old NAFTA? He said, I'm getting out of here. I'm getting out of here. You want to negotiate a new NAFTA? If not, I'm getting out of here. That's what he said. And he could have gotten out of here. I mean, presidents get out of treaties all the time. And Pelosi ain't even a president. I mean, she's just the Speaker of the House. She has nothing to say about whether Britain goes through a Brexit or not. It's the right of a sovereign nation to get out of treaties. If we don't like it, we can lump it. Are we going to fight a war with England because they, they got out of the Eurozone? Are we going to put economic sanctions on the UK because they got out of the Eurozone? Somehow, I don't think so. I think Nancy Pelosi will be long gone before that happens. Avril says captions have gone. What captions? Were there captions? Nikki King said the moderate Republicans called themselves Dems. Yeah, I know. That's what happened. They took over our party. Steve says Seth Rich leaked to WikiLeaks, not Russia. Epstein didn't kill himself and is probably still alive. Michelle, well, yeah, I know. Okay, 9/11 was an inside job. It was the only way George W. Bush could get popular. Kay says there are no moderate repugs anywhere, period. The only moderate repug that I can possibly put a finger on is someone who considers himself a radical right-wing conservative, Sagar Enjeti, who sometimes sounds pretty moderate, especially when he rails against the libertarians for opposing relief to poor people. Avril says, right you are. And Steve says, there used to be, Eisenhower was a decent man. Yeah. And John Lindsay was a decent man too. And Jack Javits, he was a decent man too. They were all decent men. Wayne Morse was a decent man. Then he switched over to the Democratic Party. He was so decent, he became a Democrat. Now, did you know Wayne Morse was once a Republican? And Kay says he was the last one, Steve. No, he was not the last one. There were moderate Republicans. Who was the last of the moderate Republicans? Maybe it was Mark Hatfield of Oregon. They used to be Republicans in Oregon, and they were moderate Republicans. I forget when Mark Hatfield got kicked out of the Congress. Kay said he was the last one, Steve. No, he wasn't the last one. Actually, they looked pretty strong. Originally, Richard Nixon was considered an Eisenhower Republican. That is to say, a moderate Republican. Only a little to the right of Nelson Rockefeller, who was once considered the epitome of a modern Republican. And by the way, when he got to be the governor of New York State, he was known for spending like a drunken sailor. He's the one who built the New York State University system. He's the one who really started it up. And then, it was Mario Cuomo who fed it when it was grown. When it was growing. Avraman says, I wish Bernie could fry this orange fascist fish, but Bernie called Adolf a racist before most would. He called him a fascist before most would. Avril says, yes, Aaron Montag. Laura says, yes, Aaron Montag. Graham Elwood visited Susie Dawson in Moscow. And Avril says, because America is a prison nation. Steve says, Aaron Montag is great and his father is wonderful as well. On the subject of addition, Steve Wolfbrand says, Vickers. Steve Wolfbrand said, Vickers. Evelyn says, Aaron Montag is testifying in the UN regarding Syria. Yes. Evelyn says, Aaron. Steve Wolfbrand says, good. And Alvaro says, the UN ain't going to do squat. And Nikki King says, yep, they share info. Snowden talked about that. And Alvaro says, Kay, are you still here? Kay says, I'm here, Alvaro. Alvaro says, great. I feel comforted in knowing that. Kay says, we already are too evil, Joe. Nikki King says, oh no. Kay says, what did Kay say? I scrolled out. Yeah, Bonnie stared at me and I. Okay, we are ready to evil. Nikki King said, oh no. And Kay said, Avro, I am always here. If you want me, message me. Avro said, I know, Dr. Joe, keeping us informed, give us weapons to fight. Evelina says, Biden is a man of very few convictions. Yes, I know. But one of his convictions is that his son, Beau, was one great and honorable guy. That was one of his convictions. So maybe Beau told him at one point he shouldn't be prosecuting Julian Assange. Could be. After all, Beau was close to Tulsi Gabbard, and Tulsi doesn't think we should be prosecuting Julian Assange. She's defended Assange in the past, hasn't she? Of course, she's been turning right on us. Avramana says, I can't use Avro's phone for that, and my other device is outdated and out of space for messaging. Kay says, well, I'm always here. Tag me on posts. Steve says, that he can remember anyway. And Avro says, Kay, I was just checking on you because you hadn't heard from you on the stream much. Avro laughs. And Kay says, I have been following Hartman and others online most of the afternoon, Kay, on YouTube. Avro says, wish AOC were running for Speaker of the House. Perhaps we'll be given a gift when the new Congress comes into session in January and AOC will run for Speaker of the House. But I don't think so. I think Jayapal is going to run for Speaker of the House. And the AOC will defer it to her because I think she likes Jayapal. And Steve Wolfbrandt laughed out loud. And I think AOC probably thinks she's not quite ready yet. Who knows? One of these years, she might want to have a child. Could be. And Pramila is older by a good deal. For all I know, she may have one already. Steve says, love Sager. The only good one. The only good Republican is Sager and Chetty. The only good Republican in the whole country. Kay says, love Rising. Yeah, I watch a lot of Rising myself. Okay, I like it a lot. I agree with them on a lot of things. But I disagree with them on some things too, of course. Howard says, I remember when the Democrats were the party of the Klan. Well, of course, I've read a lot of history, so I remember it. I guess I do remember when the Democrats were the party of the Klan in the southern states, yes. But they haven't been the party of the Klan in the northern states for all the time that I've been alive.
Uh-oh.
Bonnie says, uh-oh. Nikki King says, I'm not sure most people believe what we think we believe anyway. Laugh out loud. Steve Wolfman said, me too, Kay. Evelyn says, like Crystal a lot. And Steve says, we all love her. Alva says, is that the Brooklyn Bridge in the background? I'm not sure. I kind of tend to think it's the Golden Gate in the background, but I'm not sure. Someone tell me if it's the Golden Gate. It just looked good to me. It's some big bridge like that. It's either the Bay Bridge or the Golden Gate, or it's the Brooklyn Bridge. Okay, I don't think it's the Whitestone. It doesn't look like the Whitestone. Avra says at the Brooklyn Bridge. Avra says running out of things to say. And Avra says her Tulsi is going full QAnon? QAnon? God. Kay says, love you, Avro, laugh out loud. Steve says, Hunter is a cokehead and very corrupt as well as his uncle and father. The family is dirty. Oh, Steve, you're spreading the rumors again. Avro says, thanks, back at you, Starshine. Kay says, the old Bonnie slippers, says Avro. Kay says, Dixie Kratz. The Dixie Kratz is right. Okay, folks, I've caught up. There are only 9 of you here. I'm going to say goodnight so Bonnie can have the pleasure of my company once again. Steve says, that's not the Golden Gate. I'm guessing the Brooklyn Bridge. Well, whatever it is a beautiful bridge, isn't it? It is a beautiful bridge. And maybe if I get out of here, we can see more of it. I'm tilting. You can see more of it. It looks like it might be the New York skyline there. So it may be the Brooklyn Bridge indeed. I think one of those buildings might be the Empire State Building, right? That tall one over there. Okay. So, and Dolores says, thank you and good night all. Thank you, Dolores. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for being here. And I hope you found this fun. I agree, it's an odd kind of fun. Nikki says, nighty all, sweet dreams. And Alva says, I invited my ass off, Dr. Joe, so I don't know where everyone is. Well, the Movement for a People's Party had a do tonight. There might be a lot of people there. Steve said, sweet dreams. Kay said, love you all. Thank you for the discussion. I need these badly. We all need these badly, including me. Alva says, New York state of mind in Virginia. Well, I'm from New York. I'm from the Bronx. Can't you tell? I'll always be from the Bronx. I mean, you can take the boy out of the gutter, but you can't take the gutter out of the boy. Right? That's an old one.
I know, I heard that one.
Yeah, the only one who told me that one was actually Dick Chadwick from Chicago. Steve Wolfman said, love that song. Which one? Good night, folks. I'll see you tomorrow night. And I'll have more progressive short takes tomorrow. I had one today. I'll have another one tomorrow. At least one, maybe 2.